How you doing, everybody? Coming to you today to discuss what can be a very complex topic, and we're going to do everything we can to keep it simplified. Because if we go down that rabbit hole, this is going to be a really long video. So we're going to keep this as brief as possible. We've gotten questions lately from Hydroseed community because they're trying to figure out what's happening, why do they have to use so much nitrogen, can they improve the stability of their nitrogen and that sort of thing. So really, to address that question, we kind of have to start with, well, why might that nitrogen not be as efficient as it otherwise could be? So if you imagine, most of the hydroseeding work is done on ground that is either very rocky, might even have asphalt grindings in it. It's compacted clay soil, and it's just generally not what you would consider to be top grade soil. And really, to get into that, you have to ask yourself, okay, well then what makes it not a top grade soil? What makes it a subsoil or a subgrade soil? And what actually makes it a subgrade soil, some of the things at the top of the list are lack of biology and lack of organic matter. And so those two things are kind of, intangible. We can't see the microbiology with the naked eye necessarily. And the organic matter, we might see some fibers in there. But in general, what has happened is we've lost these two items in the soil, in a healthy soil profile, that help to secure and stabilize more volatile forms of nitrogen. So when we go out and we apply a soluble N, some sort of ammonia nitrate or calcium nitrate or something that wants to either leach or volatilize such that maybe only 40% of the nitrogen that we're applying to the ground is really making its way to the target crop ultimately, we can be losing, give or take, 60% of what we apply. So if our organic matter and our biology is not present, basically what we have is we have a soil that has no way of really grabbing and stabilizing, or very little way of stabilizing and grabbing a nitrate, for instance, a volatile form of nitrogen that just wants to head for the groundwater, okay? And so what ends up happening, if you watch these two magnets that I have, I put them together, and one magnet would be representative of, say a soil colloid or something like that. The other magnet would be your nitrate. And essentially what's happening is, they're just pushing away from one another. So they're repelling from one another, as magnets have a tendency to do. They repel. And so by repelling, our nitrate, our volatile form of nitrogen, stays in the soil solution, which is basically the water that's running down between our soil colloids, for example. And so that nitrate just heads right down to the water table. So we're losing it, our crop's not getting it. So let's focus on that crop. In the case of hydroseeding, and this can go for all sorts of other plants and crops, field crops, trees, lawn, turf grass on golf courses, you name it. But if we can improve our content of organic matter and microbiology in the soil, we can start to stabilize some of those volatile forms of nitrogen so that they can then be ingested and converted into forms of nitrogen that our plants can actually use, because our plants can't use 3 out of the 4 forms of nitrogen basically that would otherwise be down there and quote unquote ready for uptake. But that said, we want to try to improve the soil when we make our nitrogen application. So if we were to put soluble humate, which is basically another way of saying soluble extract forms of humic and fulvic molecules and compounds if we had those humic and fulvic molecules and compounds in the form of a soluble humate powder or a soluble humate grit consistency, something that's very economically viable for hydroseeders, this product here, RetaiN, with a capital N on the end, obviously standing for nitrogen, that RetaiN product is a great soluble humic and fulvic grit product that is highly economically viable for hydroseed industry. And what it's basically doing is it's short-term supplementing the lack of microorganisms and the lack of organic matter in these otherwise challenged soils that you have to hydroseed in. And instead of repelling magnets that are pushing away from each other, you now have a situation where the two magnets want to go together and they want to stick together. And so the humic and fulvic substances or molecules that are in this RetaiN product are adsorbing to make a very complex topic very simple to understand, kind of like a sponge, absorbing your volatile forms of nitrogen and stabilizing them temporarily and kind of acting as surrogate organic matter and microbiology, if you will. And so that's preserving the nitrogen from leaching into the groundwater or volatilizing into the atmosphere, because we put a lot of that nitrogen right on top of the soil when we're hydroseeding. So all that having been said, our goal is to short-term stabilize that nitrogen so that much more of that nitrogen can make it to its destination plant, in this case in hydroseeding, turf grass, or some other sort of soil stabilizing crop. So RetaiN is the product that we actually make for that process. It's a very economically viable, again, product for the hydroseed industry. It is gritty and it is a little bit more coarse, which works great in hydroseeders and fine for hydroseeders. But it would not necessarily work, say, in a golf course sprayer or in a tree care soil injection probe necessarily. So we have soluble powders. They go through some extra processing. They cost more, but you're also treating usually smaller areas. So the idea would be for us to stabilize short-term the nitrogen, volatile nitrogen compounds, so that our microbiology can move into our territory where we've made the application and process those nitrogenous compounds into a plant available form for uptake. And that way we don't lose all that volatile nitrogen to the water table or to volatilization. Okay, so that's it. That's what we're talking about, plain and simple, by using RetaiN. You add it to your tank. It is basically acting like a sponge, grabbing onto, if you will, those volatile forms of fertilizer that you have in your tank, and they're buying you time and improving your overall efficacy of your application, which then will, of course, give you almost basically a slow release fertilizer, if you will, which you did not necessarily pay for, because you will be able to reduce the amount of your fertilizer because you're now not losing up to 60%, give or take, of that product into the water table or to volatilization into the air. So that's it. Feel free to give us a call. You can also reach us at websales@organicapproach.com or info@organicapproach.com. And again, my name is Eric Morgan. And I work with these materials all the time out in the field, and I'm happy to answer your questions for you. So get a hold of us and ask us your questions. We'll do the best we can to help you out. Thank you very much. Take care.
We'll just trim that last